Every 4 years, billions of people watch a single football match, but very few ever stop to wonder, why these stadiums? Why not somewhere else? Behind every FIFA World Cup final lies a story of extraordinary engineering, political ambition, national pride, and some of the most incredible construction projects ever completed. From a simple concrete bowl in Uruguay to futuristic climate-controlled stadiums in the Middle East. This is the evolution of the stadiums that hosted football's greatest match. It begins in 1930, in a country most of the football world had never even considered. Uruguay had just won back-to-back Olympic gold medals in football. To prove they deserved to host the very first World Cup, they didn't just build a stadium, they built a statement. Estadio Centenario rose from the outskirts of Montevideo in under 9 months, an almost impossible schedule for the era. Thousands of laborers worked around the clock, sometimes through the night, under floodlights powered by generators, racing against a deadline that could not move. The result held 80,000 spectators, built almost entirely from reinforced concrete, a material still relatively new to large public structures at the time. Its central tower, standing over 100 feet tall, became a symbol of a small nation announcing itself to the world. There was no steel roof, no shade, just raw concrete terraces climbing into the sky, engineered to hold a crowd bigger than the population of most Uruguayan cities at the time. When the rains came just before kickoff, workers were still finishing sections of the stands. Uruguay beat Argentina in the final, very first cathedral. It still stands today, one of the few original World Cup final venues, still in regular use nearly a century later. 4 years later, the story shifted to Rome and to a very different kind of ambition. Italy's fascist government saw the 1934 World Cup as a chance to showcase national strength through architecture. The Stadio Nazionale PNF, later rebuilt into what we know today as the Stadio Olimpico, embraced a classical, monumental style, drawing directly from ancient Roman design. Marble facades, grand colonnades, a deliberate visual echo of the Colosseum, engineered to project imperial power through concrete and stone rather than gladiators. This was architecture used as propaganda. Every sightline was designed to feel imposing. Every entrance was built to make visitors feel small. It was one of the earliest examples of a government using stadium construction not just for sport, but for global image making, a pattern that would repeat again and again over the next 90 years. Then came a long pause. World War II brought global construction to a halt, and the World Cup itself vanished for 12 years. When football returned in 1950, it returned to Brazil and to what was, at the time, the largest stadium ever built on Earth. The Maracanã in Rio de Janeiro was designed to hold nearly 200,000 people. Let that number sink in. 200,000. To put that in perspective, that's roughly the population of a mid-sized American city, all packed into a single bowl of concrete to watch one match. Engineers used an innovative reinforced concrete ring design, allowing the upper tiers to cantilever outward without the need for the forest of support columns that blocked views in earlier stadiums. It was a genuine engineering leap, a stadium built not just to hold people, but to let every one of them actually see the game. Construction was chaotic. Workers were still pouring concrete in certain sections mere days before the tournament began. But when the doors opened, the sheer scale of the place stunned the football world. On the day of the deciding final match, an estimated crowd of nearly 200,000 people crammed inside. When Brazil lost to Uruguay that day, the silence inside the Maracanã became one of the most haunting moments in the sport's history. A stadium built for triumph, instead witnessing heartbreak on an almost unimaginable scale. By the 1960s, stadium engineering entered a new era, defined not by size, but by structural elegance. Wembley Stadium in London, host of the unforgettable 1966 final, wasn't new. It had opened decades earlier, in 1923, but its twin towers had already become one of the most recognized architectural silhouettes in world sport. Built using early reinforced concrete techniques, the towers were never just decoration. They were a symbol, instantly recognizable, appearing on posters and postcards long before anyone had heard the phrase stadium branding. Wembley's real innovation wasn't a dramatic new structure. It was psychological. It proved that a stadium could become a cultural landmark, a building people recognized the way they recognized a national monument. That idea that a stadium could be more than a container for a crowd would shape every generation of stadium design that followed. The 1970s pushed the story to Mexico and introduced an idea that felt almost like science fiction at the time: altitude as an engineering challenge. Estadio Azteca in Mexico City sits over 7,000 feet above sea level. Engineers had to account for thinner air, affecting both player performance and structural ventilation, along with Mexico City's notoriously unstable soil, built on the drained bed of an ancient lake. To keep the massive bowl stable on such soft ground, engineers used deep pile foundations, driving support columns far beneath the surface to reach solid bedrock. Azteca could hold over 100,000 fans, using a continuous bowl design that eliminated the visual barriers of older multi-tiered stadiums. It became the first stadium in history to host two separate World Cup finals, in 1970 and again in 1986, a distinction that speaks to just how far ahead of its time the engineering truly was. By 1978, the spotlight moved to Argentina, and to a stadium already decades old but re-engineered for a global audience. El Monumental in Buenos Aires had first opened in the 1930s, but for the World Cup, Argentina poured resources into modernizing it, adding capacity, and improving broadcast infrastructure for a tournament now being beamed via satellite to viewers across the planet. This was a quiet but crucial turning point. Stadiums were no longer being built only for the fans inside them. They were being engineered for the cameras, for the millions watching on television screens thousands of miles away. That shift accelerated in 1982 when the final moved to Spain's Santiago Bernabéu in Madrid. By this point, floodlighting technology had advanced dramatically, allowing for crisper, more even illumination that translated far better on television broadcasts. The Bernabéu itself, continuously expanded since the 1940s, represented a stadium built through decades of incremental engineering rather than a single dramatic construction burst, layer upon layer of renovation, stacked on top of an aging concrete skeleton. In 1986, the World Cup returned to Mexico and to Estadio Azteca once again, in a way that made the stadium itself, and not just the match, a global spectacle. Diego Maradona's performance that tournament turned Azteca into a piece of footballing folklore, but underneath the mythology was a stadium engineered decades earlier that still, remarkably, met the demands of a modern global audience. Then, in 1990, Italy returned to the Stadio Olimpico in Rome. But this time, the stadium told a completely different story than it had in 1934. Instead of fascist grandeur, The 1990 renovation embraced modern steel truss roofing, adding coverage over the stands using lightweight steel structures capable of spanning enormous distances without heavy internal support columns. This was a critical engineering milestone. Steel roofing allowed architects to protect thousands of fans from rain and sun while keeping sightlines completely unobstructed, something concrete alone had always struggled to achieve. Built in 1922, the Rose Bowl was already a historic American landmark, nestled dramatically against the San Gabriel Mountains. For the World Cup, its bowl design proved remarkably adaptable. In 1998, France built something genuinely new, the Stade de France, constructed specifically for that year's tournament on the outskirts of Paris. This was the first World Cup final stadium, designed from its very foundations around cable-supported roof technology. Instead of relying on heavy steel trusses resting on thick support columns, engineers suspended a massive elliptical roof using high-tension steel cables anchored to towering exterior pylons. The roof appeared to float above the stands, a genuine architectural marvel that redefined what a modern stadium could look like. The Stade de France cost roughly the equivalent of $500 million in today's money, an enormous figure for the era, but one that delivered a stadium capable of hosting football, rugby, athletics, and concerts, all without altering its structure. It introduced a concept that would define nearly every major stadium built afterward: multi-purpose flexibility, engineered directly into the architecture itself. By 2002, the World Cup expanded into Asia for the first time, co-hosted by Japan and South Korea, with the final played at International Stadium, Yokohama. Japanese engineers brought a new obsession with precision to stadium construction, using advanced computer modeling to calculate crowd flow, structural stress, and even acoustic behavior before a single support beam was placed. The stadium's oval bowl design maximized capacity while keeping every seat within a carefully calculated viewing distance from the pitch, a science that had, by this point, become as rigorous as aerospace engineering. In 2006, Germany hosted the tournament, and the final returned to Berlin's Olympiastadion, originally built in the 1930s for the 1936 Olympics. Rather than demolishing this historically loaded structure, German engineers undertook a massive renovation, adding a modern, lightweight roof canopy while preserving the original stone facade beneath it. It was a masterclass in architectural restraint, blending a difficult history with cutting-edge engineering rather than erasing the past entirely. Then, in 2010, the World Cup arrived in Africa for the first time, and South Africa unveiled Soccer City, officially FNB Stadium, just outside Johannesburg. Its exterior design, inspired by the shape and pattern of a traditional African clay pot known as a calabash, wrapped the entire stadium in a textured facade using earth-toned fiber cement panels, creating a genuinely unique architectural identity unlike anything built before it. Underneath that striking shell sat a stadium holding roughly 94,000 fans, and a budget stretching into the hundreds of millions of dollars. Engineers embedded advanced lighting systems into the facade itself, allowing the stadium's exterior to glow with warm amber light at night, transforming it into a genuine landmark, visible for miles across the Johannesburg skyline. Soccer City proved that a World Cup stadium could carry deep cultural symbolism while still meeting the most demanding modern engineering standards. By 2014, the World Cup returned to Brazil and, remarkably, back to the Maracanã itself, 64 years after that stunning first final. But this was no longer the raw concrete giant of 1950. A massive renovation had reduced its capacity to roughly 78,000 seats, all fully covered now by a modern cantilevered roof, supported by a striking steel ring structure, a direct engineering answer to the exposed, shadeless bowl of decades earlier. The transformation cost hundreds of millions of dollars and represented something profound, an aging engineering icon completely modernized without losing its soul. Then, in 2018, the final moved to Moscow's Luzhniki Stadium, another venue rebuilt almost entirely from within its own historic shell. Originally constructed in the 1950s, Luzhniki underwent a renovation reportedly costing over $300 million, adding a translucent polycarbonate roof and completely rebuilt interior seating bowls, while preserving its original neoclassical exterior facade as a link to Soviet-era history. And then came Qatar in 2022, and a stadium that pushed engineering into territory no World Cup had ever attempted before. Lusail Stadium rose from empty desert north of Doha, in a city that, remarkably, didn't fully exist yet when construction began. Preparatory work started around 2015, with actual construction launching in 2017, and the stadium reaching completion by late 2021. Its design draws from the intricate geometric patterns of traditional Islamic art and the interplay of light and shadow found in a Faynar lantern, translated into a shimmering golden triangular facade unlike anything seen at a football stadium before. Lusail holds close to 89,000 spectators and reportedly cost in the region of $760 million to construct. But the real engineering breakthrough sat hidden beneath the seats. Qatar's extreme desert heat demanded an entirely new approach to climate control, and Lusail, like Qatar's other World Cup venues, used advanced cooling technology, drawing in outside air, cooling it using solar-assisted systems, and channeling it through vents positioned to blanket both players and spectators in a controlled microclimate, even as the desert outside baked well above 40 degrees Celsius. It was, in essence, climate engineering applied to sport, a stadium designed to defeat its own environment. After the tournament, plans called for the upper tier to be dismantled entirely, shrinking the venue to 40,000 seats and repurposing much of the space into schools, housing, and community facilities, treating the stadium not as a permanent monument, but as a temporary machine built for one extraordinary month, then reshaped for everyday life. Which brings us to now, to 2026, and to a chapter of the story unlike any that came before it. For the first time, the World Cup Final will be played not in a stadium built for football, but in one of the most advanced American football venues on earth, MetLife Stadium in East Rutherford, New Jersey, just minutes from the skyline of New York City. MetLife opened in 2010 at a cost of roughly $1.6 billion, making it, at the time, the most expensive stadium ever constructed in the United States. It was never designed with football, the sport, in mind. It was built for the NFL's New York Giants and Jets, sharing a single venue in an arrangement almost unheard of in American sports. So why was it chosen to host the most watched match on the planet? The answer lies partly in geography and partly in sheer logistics. MetLife sits within reach of the largest media market in the world, alongside a transit system, hotel infrastructure, and airport capacity, capable of absorbing well over 1 million visiting fans. It beat out strong competition, including SoFi Stadium in Los Angeles, whose field was simply too narrow for FIFA's requirements, and AT&T Stadium in Texas, which offered greater capacity but ultimately lost out on transportation access and political backing. But choosing MetLife meant transforming it. Beginning in 2024, engineers launched a two-phase renovation, carefully demolishing all four corners of the stadium's existing concrete seating bowl and replacing them with a new modular steel composite seating system, a lightweight, removable structure that could widen the playing field to meet FIFA's international standards without permanently sacrificing the stadium's beloved NFL seating capacity. It's a remarkable piece of adaptive engineering. Seats that can quite literally be taken apart, reshaped, and rebuilt to serve two completely different sports. Beyond the seating bowl, MetLife has been fitted with an entirely natural grass-playing surface for the tournament, replacing its usual artificial turf, alongside major upgrades to its lighting systems, its broadcast technology, and its security infrastructure. Massive HD video boards positioned at every corner of the upper deck, alongside towering LED entrance pylons, transform the stadium into a fully digital, smart technology environment, capable of adjusting lighting, signage, and crowd information in real time. Transportation planning has become its own engineering challenge. With no direct rail line built specifically for the stadium, officials have developed a dedicated busway and expanded rail shuttle service, connecting fans from Manhattan through Secaucus Junction, an entire temporary transit ecosystem engineered around a single afternoon of football. MetLife carries a listed capacity of around 82,500 seats for the final, smaller than several of its predecessors, but positioned to deliver an economic impact projected in the billions of dollars for the New York and New Jersey region, with more than 1 million visitors expected across the broader tournament. In many ways, MetLife represents something different from every stadium before it in this story. It isn't a monument built for football alone. It's proof that in the modern era, engineering flexibility, the ability to transform a single structure to serve entirely different sports, entirely different audiences, entirely different eras, may be the most valuable architectural skill of all. From a concrete bowl finished in the middle of the night in Montevideo, to a desert stadium engineered to defeat its own climate, to a shape-shifting American giant built for two different games entirely, the story of the World Cup Final Stadium has never really been about football. It's been about ambition, about nations proving what they could build, about engineers solving problems that had never existed before because no one had ever needed a building quite like this. The next World Cup champion will lift football's greatest trophy inside one of the world's most advanced stadiums. But long after the final whistle, what will remain is another chapter in nearly a century of architectural innovation. Because every World Cup final isn't remembered only for who won. It's remembered for where history was made. If you enjoy discovering the world's greatest engineering achievements, don't forget to subscribe to Next Build for more stories behind humanity's most incredible projects.